Well, it's business as usual for former U.S. President Donald Trump this weekend, one day after he pleaded not guilty to charges. He tried to undermine the results of the 2020 election. Trump will speak at GOP events in Alabama and South Carolina this weekend. After entering his not guilty plea yesterday, the prosecution and defense agreed on conditions. Now, these include not talking about the facts of the case with anyone he knows is a witness without lawyers present. He also has to appear in court as required and sign up an appearance bond. Well, joining us now for a closer look at that is lawyer Gary Cluley, who has handled his fair share of sensitive cases. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk about some of these conditions. And I'm curious, how do you monitor his behaviors and some of the things that he's required to do or not to do while he's, conducting his everyday business? This is not a guy who plays by the rules normally.
No, he doesn't really much like the rules on the evidence. But the fact is, you bring the lawyers in and you get behind closed doors. I mean, he's been doing it for a long time now, so nobody needs to instruct him how to do it.
What are some of the penalties, or what could happen to him if he breaches any of these conditions?
Well, the prosecution will seek to put him in jail because that will limit his access to people whose evidence he can try and affect, right?
What about when it comes to things like social media? I mean, he's never been shy of voicing his opinions of whether it's judges, political opponents. Could that hurt him throughout this process?
Well, sure, of course, because, it hurt him in that civil case in New York. He's going off about the complainant and the judge and the system, and that hurt him. And I think that probably was good for about $3 of the $5 million in damages, because the courts here are not going to roll over, even if they were appointed by him, because they have to defend the integrity of their institution, right?
I'm curious, to be Mr. Trump's lawyer or one of his lawyers, probably not an easy thing to do, because I would guess that as a lawyer, you want to have, you want to be able to tell your client, listen, don't do this. You want to be able to say, listen, this is what you can't do, and this is what you can do. But, telling Mr. Trump what to do, not necessarily an easy thing, nor will he necessarily listen to lawyers.
It's more like being a zookeeper when having the tiger by the tail than it is lawyering. I mean, this is a unique character, by any stretch, and I don't see him changing. Speaking of animals, he's not going to change his spots.
This is the third indictment in 4 months, but these are the charges that really strike at the heart of U.S. democracy. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, how does this really change the game for him and his legal defense? I mean, you've got these other indictments that involve hush money payments to a former porn star, hiding alleged documents allegedly at his Mar-a-Lago home. But these charges are different.
Yeah, they are, and particularly the ones that allege obstruct justice. Because they remind people of Watergate, and nobody likes to be compared to Nixon. That didn't work out very well for him, and I think the same fate awaits Mr. Trump.
Does it surprise you that while all of this is playing out, that Mr. Trump is absolutely dominating in the polls when it comes to his bid for the Republican nomination for president?
That's a little hard to understand. It's the entertainment value is intense. And a lot of people are convinced, I think, that he's being railroaded, but that's because they haven't seen the evidence. I think that'll wear thin over time. When it's one thing to answer the phone on a poll, and say, I still stand by him. It's another thing to watch the proceedings play out, see what the evidence is, see the damage he's done to the system, and then vote. I don't see it happening, but the problem is the lack of meaningful opposition, no?
And lastly, what do you think the impact would be if, we don't want to guess how this is all going to play out, but do you really think that, this U.S. District Judge would really put this former president in jail behind bars?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. Because I think that they know that the scrutiny of what they do and how they do is intense like never before, maybe even really since Nixon. The parallel's a good one. When the Supreme Court was given the option to let him invoke executive privilege, they said absolutely not.
It'll be interesting to see what evidence is also presented, but also how some of the other witnesses might decide to maybe throw the former president under the bus.
I can think of a few offhand who maybe don't want to run the risk of going to jail, and giving up their nice life.
Son-in-law.
And the former mayor of New York.
It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. Gary Cluley, we always appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Problem. My pleasure.